Picture this: a Saturday morning in 1962, a kitchen somewhere in Harlem, or maybe Detroit, or Chicago, or anywhere Black people were building something beautiful out of almost nothing. A young man is seated in a wooden chair, shoulders draped with an old towel, jaw clenched so tight you can see the muscle working in his cheek. His buddy stands over him with rubber gloves on both hands, slowly working a pale yellowish paste through his hair with a comb. The smell is sharp, chemical, almost industrial. Within seconds, the scalp begins to tingle. Then the tingle becomes a sting. Then the sting becomes fire. The young man grips the sides of the chair. He does not move, because the longer you can stand it, the straighter your hair comes out. And in 1962, straight hair on a Black man meant something. It meant you had arrived. It meant you were somebody. What he was enduring had a name, and that name was the Conk. And it was just one of the hairstyles that defined, tortured, and ultimately transformed an entire generation. Today, we are exploring 20 hairstyles Black men wore, suffered for, and eventually walked away from, styles that built an identity and sparked a revolution. Let us start with the one that started it all: the Conk. Even the name sounds like something that hits you, and it did. This was not a haircut, it was a ritual, a commitment, a pain tax paid at the altar of beauty and belonging. The formula went like this: 1 can of Red Devil lye, 2 peeled white potatoes, 2 raw eggs, and a mason jar that got so hot on the outside from the chemical reaction that you could not hold it with bare hands. You mixed it into a pale, jelly-like paste, what chemists would later confirm was a sodium hydroxide solution sitting at a pH of 12 to 14, compared to your scalp's natural pH of 4.5. In other words, a liquid that could dissolve protein. That liquid went on your head. Before the Congolene touched a single strand, Vaseline was massaged hard into the scalp, packed thick along the ears, the forehead, and the back of the neck, because without that barrier, the lie would just keep eating. Malcolm X described his first conk in his autobiography with words that still feel like a heat lamp held too close to the face. He wrote that the mixture just felt warm when Shorty started combing it in, but then his head caught fire. His eyes watered, his nose ran. He gripped the kitchen table and tried to pull both sides of it together. The comb felt, he said, like it was raking his skin off. He bolted for the wash basin before Shorty could stop him. That was the conk, and millions of men did it willingly, repeatedly, every 2 to 6 weeks, because the result, hair that hung straight, shone like silk, and swept back in waves that caught the light, was its own kind of magic. A professional conk at the barbershop ran $3 to $4 in the early 1940s. That is $55 to $73 in today's money, for a process that had to be redone every few weeks. Some men did the math and started doing it at home, the way Shorty and Malcolm X did, to avoid paying the barbershop $3 or $4 a pop. Either way, the annual cost of staying conked could run the equivalent of over $1,000 today. And yet, men paid it. Men endured it. Because this was the look of Cab Calloway, of James Brown, of Little Richard's sky-high pompadour, of Nat King Cole seated at a piano, looking like he'd been sculpted. The conk told the world you were polished, that you had presence, that you mattered. And if the conk was the engine underneath, the pompadour was the monument built on top of it. This was hair swept up and back from the forehead into a wave so dramatic, it practically introduced itself before you walked into the room. Little Richard's pompadour was architectural, a towering crest of straightened, shining hair that required a full conk underneath, and then Murray's superior pomade packed in to hold the shape. Murray's was created in 1925 by a Black Chicago barber named C.D. Murray, and its formula has not changed in 100 years. Petrolatum, mineral oil, fragrance. That's it. The pomade was so heavy, so determined to stay put that the company's own website suggests using dish soap to remove it. Men used to joke that Murray's was the only thing that outlasted a marriage. Jackie Wilson wore the pompadour. Sam Cooke wore it. Ike Turner wore it. And when those men walked onto a stage, the pompadour wasn't just hair, it was a crown. Close in spirit to the pompadour was the slick-back, conked hair combed flat against the skull, gleaming like poured oil under stage lights. This was the jazz musician's signature, the look of men who understood that cool was not loud, it was controlled. Miles Davis wore it. Marvin Gaye wore it in his early years, before everything changed. The slick back required the same chemical suffering as any conked style, but the payoff was an almost supernatural smoothness. A look so composed it made you feel like whatever room you walked into, you already owned it. Then there was the pressed and curled look, and this one came with a different kind of pain, older than lie, older than chemistry. The hot comb, a brass or stainless steel comb, heated directly over a stove burner until it reached temperatures between 300 and 500 degrees Fahrenheit. You tested it by pressing it against white paper. If the paper scorched brown, the comb was too hot. If it left no mark at all, it was not hot enough. The sweet spot was somewhere between smoking and burning. Madam C.J. Walker did not invent the hot comb. It originated in the 1870s in France. She redesigned it for black hair, widened the teeth, incorporated it into her Walker system beginning in 1906, and turned it into one of the first commercial empires built by a black woman in this country. The smell of a hot comb session was its own sensory universe. Singed hair, heated bergamot grease, faint smoke rising toward the ceiling. Burns to the ear, burns to the neck. A mark on the forehead that faded over days, and a style that lasted until the first drop of rain, the first bead of sweat, until moisture reminded the hair exactly what it was. The press was impermanent, but the ritual of it, a child sitting still while a parent worked heat and grease and care through their hair, was something that lasted a lifetime. And then the world changed. Not slowly, not gently. It changed like a door being kicked open. The afro arrived not as a hairstyle, but as a declaration. In January of 1962, a photographer named Kwame Brathwaite staged a fashion show in the basement of a Harlem nightclub called the Purple Manor. He called the show Naturally 1962. The models who walked that makeshift runway wore natural hair and African-inspired clothing, and the audience, who had grown up in a world where straight hair was currency, did not quite know what to make of it. They were looking at something they had not seen treated as beautiful before. They were looking at the beginning of the end of the conk. Afro sheen was the product that met that moment. Johnson Products Company had been founded in 1954 by George E. Johnson Sr. with a $250 loan. By 1970, the company was doing $12.6 million a year in sales. By 1971, it became the first Black-owned company listed on the American Stock Exchange and the first Black-owned company to sponsor a nationally syndicated television show, Soul Train, which premiered on October 2nd, 1971. The Afro sheen advertisements were unlike anything Black consumers had seen. Black people were depicted as doctors, as flight attendants, as world leaders. The slogans read, "Natural hair hangs out. Beautiful." The Afro pick, wide-toothed and sometimes carved to look like a raised fist, became a symbol you carried in your back pocket like a statement. The pain of the Afro was not physical. The pain was social. Early adopters faced ridicule, workplace bans, and police targeting. But a 1969 Newsweek poll found that 70% of Black Americans under 30 in northern cities approved of natural hair. The tide had turned, and it turned because of what was said on February 21st, 1965. That was the day Malcolm X was assassinated. His autobiography was published that same year, and in it he called his conk his first really big step towards self-degradation, writing that a black man with conked hair was shouting to anyone who looked at him. His words, "I am ashamed to be a Negro." He wrote that he had endured literal burning of his own flesh to look like a white man's hair. His arc from the young hustler called Detroit Red, grinning with a fresh conk in the mirror, to the man in a suit with close-cropped natural hair, speaking truth in front of thousands, became the template. A year later, on June 16, 1966, Stokely Carmichael stepped to a microphone in Greenwood, Mississippi, and said two words that cracked the era in half: Black Power. He told the crowd that a broad nose and thick lips and nappy hair was them, and they were going to call that beautiful whether anyone liked it or not. The conk never recovered. By the mid-60s, it was already dying. By 1970, it was history. But the barbershop lived on. It always lived on. In a world where nearly every public space was segregated, the black barbershop was sacred ground, one of the few places where black men could gather, argue, grieve, celebrate, and simply be. Professor Quincy Mills of Vassar College spent years documenting this. The FBI program COINTELPRO monitored black barbershops during the civil rights era because the government understood what the community had always known. Real power was organized at the barbershop chair. Men like Alonzo Herndon, born into slavery in 1858, built barbershop empires in Atlanta and became among the first African-American millionaires. John Merrick, also born enslaved, owned 5 barbershops and used the profits to found one of the most important black-owned insurance companies in American history. A basic haircut cost $1 to $1.50 in the 1950s. By 1966, barbers' unions were raising prices to $2.25 and $2.50 for something that essential and that was charged with meaning. It was still almost nothing. The taper was the barbershop's most democratic offering. Hair was cut progressively shorter from the crown to the neckline, with clean lines around the ears and a razor-sharp edge along the hairline. It was the respectable cut, the one you wore to church, to a job interview, to meet her father. Black barbers transformed the basic military taper into a precision art, and the tools they wielded became legendary in their own right. Wahl introduced the electric clipper in 1921. Andis founded its company around the same year. Oster entered in 1928, and the Classic 76 became the instrument that built careers. The razor edge along the hairline was the signature, clean enough to look like it was drawn with a ruler. The one hazard was razor bumps, pseudofolliculitis barbae, the painful ingrown hairs that came from cutting tightly coiled follicles too close. Black men dealt with it the way they dealt with most painful things, stoically and with the right product. The fade was the taper's more dramatic cousin, hair that went from full at the crown all the way to skin at the neckline, the transition so gradual it seemed to dissolve rather than end. The fade originated in U.S. military grooming requirements from the 1940s and the 1950s. Black soldiers brought it home from the war and gave it to the barbershop, and the barbershop turned it into something the military never imagined. A quality fade takes 30 to 45 minutes and requires multiple guard sizes, a steady hand, and the kind of spatial confidence that only comes from years behind the chair. Touch it up every 2 to 3 weeks, or the magic disappears. The 360 waves were a different kind of devotion entirely, a hairstyle that had no chemical shortcuts, no barbershop trick, just brushing, 15 to 30 minutes of brushing every single day, with a boar bristle brush that left your scalp sore and tingling. Then a do-rag pressed tight to the skull overnight to compress the wave pattern while you slept. The wolfing period, 4 to 12 weeks of letting the hair grow while you kept brushing and resisting every urge to cut, was the trial by fire. The waves appeared gradually, radiating from the crown in concentric rings like ripples on dark water. Sportin Waves gel pomade in the gold and black can became the product of choice. Murray's pomade worked too, always Murray's. The do-rag was the guardian of the whole process. Derived from the word do, as in hairdo, it traces back to the 19th century, first worn as a head covering and later adopted by black men in the 1930s, specifically to protect their conked styles during sleep. The first known written use of the word appeared in the Akron Beacon Journal in June of 1966. The NFL banned it in 2001. The NBA followed in 2005. In 2020, Rihanna wore one on the cover of Vogue. Every generation reclaims what the last one was told to hide. The flat top arrived from the military in the 1950s, and the barbershop turned it into sculpture. Hair on the crown was cut level, standing up like a platform, with the sides either tapered or faded clean. Black men's natural hair texture was ideal for the flat top, the coil and spring of the strands holding the shape without product or architecture. By the 1980s, it had evolved into the high top fade, and the high top fade became the crown jewel of hip-hop's golden era. Kid Reed of Kid and Play wore his high top at roughly 10 inches tall. Will Smith rocked it on The Fresh Prince. Grace Jones wore a geometric version so sharp it looked like it was cut with a protractor. The high top said, "I have arrived. I am exactly who I intend to be, and I will be back in 2 weeks for a lineup." Famous wearers got their edges tightened every 7 days. You could not let a high top fade. And then there was the Jheri curl, the great wet revolution of the late 1970s and early 1980s. Two-step chemical processing created loose, glistening spirals and a permanent wet look that dripped curl activator onto everything it touched. Jerry Redding invented the salon process, but Comer Cottrell's Proline Corporation democratized it, releasing the at-home curly kit for $8 when the salon version cost $200. The product that followed a man everywhere, down his collar, onto his pillowcase, across the headrest of his car, became so iconic it was parodied as Soul Glow in Coming to America in 1988. Michael Jackson wore it on the Thriller album cover in 1982. The Jheri curl was lavish, loud, and deeply impractical. It was also deeply beloved, the plastic cap you wore to bed, the activator you spritzed on every morning like cologne, the way the curls caught light like they had been dipped in oil. That was the Jheri curl, messy and magnificent. Murray's Pomade, Royal Crown Hair Dressing, Sulfur 8, Pink Oil Moisturizer. These were not just products, they were names that lived in bathroom cabinets for decades. Royal Crown was created in 1936 when George B. Long borrowed $500 and started J. Strickland and Company. Little Richard promoted Royal Crown in radio commercials. He was the same Little Richard whose pompadour reached toward the ceiling and whose voice could peel paint from a wall. Sulfur 8, launched in 1948, contained 2% sulfur as its active ingredient and a menthol finish that made your scalp tingle in a completely different way than lye. This tingle was healing, medicated, a cool hand on a hot head. It smelled unmistakable, that particular sulfurous warmth. If you grew up in a black household, you did not need to see the green and yellow jar to know what it was. You just had to catch one whiff. The Smithsonian National Museum of American History preserved it, not as an artifact of suffering, but as a document of care. And that is the thing that runs underneath all of it, beneath the burning lye and the scorching hot comb, and the headaches from durags pulled too tight, and the razor bumps from blades pressed too close. Beneath all of that suffering was an act of care so profound, it sometimes looked like vanity from the outside. A father standing over his son on a Sunday morning, working a comb through freshly washed hair with hands that had spent all week doing harder things. A barber who knew not just the shape of your head, but the shape of your life, your job, your kids, your heartbreak, your plans. A community of men who sat together for hours every week and built something that no history book fully captures. a way of being seen, of being known, of belonging to something with standards and style and pride. The conch is gone now. The pompadour is mostly nostalgia. Even the high-top fade lives mostly in throwback photos and knowing smiles. But the barbershop endures. The ritual of the chair endures. The argument over whose lineup is cleaner endures. And the deeper truth endures too, that these men were never just chasing beauty. They were chasing dignity in a world that was not always prepared to offer it freely. They paid for it in flesh and time and money. They argued about it in barber shops that were also classrooms, sanctuaries, courtrooms, and community centers. They burned their scalps to meet a standard, and then one day, together, they decided the standard had been wrong all along, and they started over. That is not just the history of hair, that is the history of a people deciding, one careful choice at a time, exactly who they were going to be. Thank you so much for spending this time with us on this trip down memory lane. We hope it brought something back for you. If it did, go ahead and hit the like button because it helps more people find stories like this one. Share it with someone who remembers those Saturday mornings, those barbershop hours, those jars of Murray's on the bathroom shelf. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join us because we have so many more journeys like this one waiting for you.